There's a James Cameron thing where he says, show the whole, which would be a weird phrase to say if he was in the adult entertainment industry. But luckily he makes big budget action movies, and what he's saying is it's okay to have a plot hole, but have the characters talk about it.
Welcome to Script Apart, a podcast about the first draft secrets of great movies. Each episode, we'll be speaking to an incredible screenwriter who's kindly dug out their initial screenplay for what became a beloved movie, discussing with us what changed, what didn't, and why, from first draft to the big screen. This week we're joined by the brilliant Joe Cornish, delving into the first draft of his 2011 sci-fi comedy, Attack the Block. Joe was a popular comedian, writer and broadcaster prior to making this debut feature about an alien invasion on a South London council estate. Starring a then unknown John Boyega, Attack the Block was a critical smash full of gorilla-like creatures from outer space, teen heroes, breathless set pieces and searing social commentary. Since then, he's worked on Marvel's Ant-Man and The Adventures of Tintin with a certain Steven Spielberg. He also wrote and directed last year's excellent The Kid Who Would Be King. Here's what Joe had to say about the real-life mugging that inspired Attack the Block, the importance of research to tell an authentic story, and his memories of trips to buy weed with his good friend Louis Theroux. You're listening to Script Apart, hosted by me, Al Horner, and produced by Kimmel Demek. Over to Joe. Joe Cornish, hey. So this is kind of crazy timing. We arranged this podcast a few weeks ago, in which time there's been this incredible uprising against racism across the world. John Boyega gave an incredible speech at a London rally, sparking lots of celebration of his work as an actor. As a result, over the last couple of weeks, there's been this renewed celebration of Attack the Block. I've seen Lin-Manuel Miranda's been tweeting about it, David F. Sandberg, loads of film websites have run pieces kind of revisiting the movie. I know that you're not a massive social media person, but have you kind of been watching this unfold, and what's the emotion been seeing kind of this film be celebrated all over again?
Mixed feelings, really. You know, the movie's nearly 10 years old now, and it's trying to address issues that were fairly ingrained then, you know, and have certainly stuck around. So, you know, and it's tough as well. You know, obviously it's a piece of kind of escapist action adventure cinema that cinema, he says, film. that hopefully has a bit of socio-political subtext to it, and you know, at the time when it came out, it put a lot of people's backs up because it has a very unusual protagonist and sort of arc to the protagonist. But the short answer to your question is that it's wonderful that people are revisiting the film. It's terrific that, you know, some of the things it's trying to examine are coming through to people who watch it, because when you make something, you're never quite sure whether you're going to successfully communicate what you want to communicate. So that's very rewarding that people are, you know, reading it and getting the things that we intended from it. But sure. You know, most of all, it's a moment for John, and it's a moment for hopefully some social change, and you know, to be a tiny little part of, you know, something that I hope is much bigger is exciting. I
mean, it's interesting, over the last sort of almost 10 years, as you say, the film has been celebrated for its representation and for the way it humanized a type of person who at the time was being demonized on the front pages of tabloids every day. So it sounds from what you were saying there that was something you like consciously wanted to achieve.
It's very much in the tradition of, you know, particularly John Carpenter's movie Assault on Precinct 13, that has this fantastic arc where there's a character who's actually a murderer who's being transported from prison to prison, that ends up as part of the siege and working alongside the police officer protagonist. So that has at the time, a very sort of progressive and interesting trajectory with its two lead characters. So that was something we were trying to reflect. Also, George Romero's Night of the Living Dead has interesting, you know, racial and social subtext to it. We were kind of writing it in that tradition. And yeah, it really excited me. At the time, I was really into a Korean movie called Attack the Gas Station.
Yeah.
That's about this gang that take a gas station hostage. They're sort of they're baddies at the beginning, and they take the gas station hostage, and they sort of end up running it and just serving people. And it's really funny and kind of subversive, and it has this amazing opening where you realize there's a moment in it where you realize that these are your protagonists.
Yeah.
You're like, oh shit, like no one else is going to walk into this scenario. Like it's not going to have a save the cat moment. These are my protagonists. And at the time I found that, and I still do find that really exciting, because it immediately puts you in a position where you have to try and invest, or it's a very brave thing to do with a narrative, because you're either going to lose your audience or you're going to find a tone and a through line that challenges their preconceptions. So that was the point with Attack the Block, was to sort of start with the stereotype and really show these kids as a kind of masked gang, and even with their costuming to hide their faces, make them silhouettes, to just make them sort of almost the tabloid cliche at the beginning, and then over the next 85 minutes to try and unravel that and show you how those kids, because they're children basically, have ended up in a situation where they would feel that thing they do at the beginning is a reasonable thing to do.
And that's interesting, because that journey that the audience takes of realizing that these are the protagonists, you do start the film, even in this first draft, it starts in much the way that we see on screen. So we're introduced to Sam. She's walking home from the tube. She gets mugged by these kids who at first are intimidating, but then you start to pepper in these really fun kind of like humanizing lines of dialogue and things like that. I mean, I love Biggs kind of talking on the phone to his mom, assuring her that, yes, Mom, I had pizza for dinner, I've eaten, and all that kind of thing. So can you tell me a little bit about the process of sort of going on that journey with these characters and starting to endear them to the audience and to challenge the audience to kind of realize that these aren't the people who you thought they were at the beginning of the film?
Well, we did a huge amount of research for the film, and I did all that research before I wrote the screenplay. And we went to youth groups and youth clubs. We tried to find kids who were as close to the characters we were writing about. And we talked them through the narrative and recorded everything they said. And then I went home and for listeners, I'm holding up a big A4 binder.
Wow.
in which, and then I came home and I transcribed every single interview.
Yeah.
Myself, so that I could really try and get into the argot. And then we went back and did it again and again. We were basically trying to find the characters in the real world. So we tried to find Biggs, and we tried to find Pest, and particularly we tried to find Moses, and we did find this one really wonderful kid who'd managed to get himself excluded and in quite a bit of trouble, and we got to know him pretty well and really interviewed him a bunch of times and tried to really dig into his life and his past, and again transcribed all of that. And then so a lot of the dialogue comes out of those interviews I did. So these, in the folder you can see here, there's pink Post-its. So that's just some weird thing. I don't even know what that is. I'm not even going to say. That is something a kid called Jamie said in a youth club in the Walworth Road on the 13th of the 11th, 2007. So there's a line here. A kid called Isaac said, I'd say, see you later. I'd let everyone else walk out and I'd stay in my house and play pro. So that it eventually became FIFA.
Yeah. In fact, in the first draft, it is still pro. And I was interested in how EA managed to lobby you to change it to FIFA in the final film.
That would have been the cast. That would have been John and Simon and Alex and all the actors. Because when we came to rehearsing before we shot, we spent a week or two just going through the script line by line. We would have a day on each character. So one day would be John's day, another day would be another actor's day, and we would all just talk through every single line of theirs, why their character was saying it, and if they wanted to change it, they could, you know. So we would have had a conversation about whether it would be pro or FIFA. And as a group, they voted for FIFA instead. So in answer to your question, all that characterful stuff came from the actors and came from research, but it also came from, you know, that was why I was writing the film. The point of writing the film was to take a kid who mugged a nurse and try and understand why, not excuse it, but understand why a kid would find themselves in that position.
And that came from real life, from an experience you had, right?
It did, yeah. It came from being mugged myself, but I also, you know, I grew up in Stockwell, and you know, I've lived here since December the 20th, 1968. So I've lived through, you know, the first movie I ever saw at the cinema was when the Brixton Academy was a cinema rather than a concert venue. You know, I used to buy all my toys at Bon Marché in Brixton. I remember, you know, seeing Superman 2 when the first riots happened. Might have been the second riots. So, you know, I'm very much a sort of middle class kid, but it's hard not to have some awareness of social disparities when you know, grow up in this area. So no, the point of the film was to try and address, you know, the demonization and the sort of lack of, you know, empathy that was going on at the time when it came to, you know, what was popularly known as hoodies.
Yeah, because this would have been, I mean, the draft that you sent over, I think that's dated March 2008. And I mean, I haven't got my timelines all figured out, but this would have been like right around the kind of ASBO panic and all that kind of thing, right? Can you explain a little bit about the cultural climate and what an ASBO is and what is meant by a hoodie?
Well, it's just a very tabloidy approach to the whole thing, you know. I don't think it's changed enormously. You know, at the moment, people seem to care more about the statue than they do about the socio-economic conditions of a massive slice of the populace. There's just a tendency to, you know, there's just a lot of racism around, and you know, and the point is, genre cinema is actually really good at addressing stuff like this, and really good at taking themes like this, and so the idea was to do it in a. The other thing I was reacting to was that genre of cinema at the time was often quite bleak and depressing, and you know, you weren't necessarily. I don't know. You just sometimes ended up in quite a bleak place when people tried to tell stories set in this milieu, especially with British cinema. And so I wanted to do something uplifting and escapist and thrilling and exciting with explosions and chases and aliens and stuff.
Yeah.
And it's important to remember that, with that, you know, that all the time we were sort of trying to do both things.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting. There are differences between this first draft and the film that we all know and love now, but it is like it's remarkably similar. And it made me kind of wonder, the fact that you had all the story beats and all the characters in place in this first draft, are you a big outline kind of guy? Do you work out what this story is going to be in outline form, and then screenplay is just a case of putting those ideas into form? So
the first thing I do is I make an image book.
Oh, wow.
So this is the image book for Attack the Block, dated the 10th month of 2007.
Yeah.
And so again, I got my friend to do lots of illustrations, and I did a little pretend poster, and I had an X certificate because I really liked the X on it. And then I just grabbed a bunch of images.
Wow.
So a sort of mood book. I'm showing. So, you know, this is an audio podcast, so you're just going to have to imagine this. Yeah. But it's a mixture of images of werewolves and kids, inner city kids, tower blocks, aliens, all sorts of stuff, and all mixed together to really give the. And this is a kid who was a friend of mine called Moses. His name's Moses Elliott, from whom the name of the lead character came from, and he was one of the first. He lived on the Haygate estate, and he was one of the first people I talked to try and get my head around the story. So there's also photos of Moses on his bike, showing the real Moses, who's absolutely nothing like the Moses in the film.
Yeah,
but he's a really lovely guy, and that was him showing me around the Haygate estate.
Wow.
There's a couple of Martin Parr photos there. So just to move, and then once I've done that, I also had little drawings of the characters, because I think it helps to try and imagine the characters in your mind's eye before you write. And there's a bunch of sketches trying to figure out what the alien looked like.
Oh yeah,
this is really early on. Then I write a treatment. Oh, sorry, I dropped my phone. So here's the step outline. My lever arch file here. So Act 1 is called We Killed an Alien. And there's 31 paragraphs, little scenes in them. Act 2 is called But Now Its Friends Are Trying to Kill Me. And then there's a bunch of scenes, 40, 50, 51, 52, 53, 56. Oh, it's a long Act 2. And then Act 3 is just called Protect the Block.
So it sounds like from an early point, you knew this was going to be a small, contained story about one night.
Yeah, well, I love movies like that. I love Die Hard. What else do I love? I love Die Hard.
We can just end the podcast there.
Aliens. Anything, Towering Inferno, Poseidon Adventure, like Assault on Precinct 13, The Thing, like Alien, a movie where you get to understand the geography of a location before something kicks off.
Yeah.
And those movies where they really cleverly in the first act, nothing's happening, but everything's happening.
Yeah,
so you're seeing what you think are low-key little human moments between characters, but a bunch of shit's being, a bunch of playing cards are being popped into your pockets as you watch, so that the magician can then produce them in the third act.
When you come to do that, do you figure out what those playing cards are going to be, and then retroactively go back and place them in at the beginning?
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that's something I've learned from watching movies, and also Edgar does that really brilliantly in all his movies. It's just the concept of setup and payoff is the simplest way to think about it. But one of the good ways of articulating it that Simon Pegg once said to me was, oh God, I'm not going to be able to remember it now. Thesis, antithesis, synthesis.
Yeah. So
you set up a premise, you then explore the opposite of that premise, and you arrive at somewhere that's the synthesis, that's the sort of negotiation, the result, the sort of balance between those two opposites.
Yeah.
So I don't know, let's try and figure it out. Like right now in Die Hard, you start with a divorced couple, you start with a retired cop who's become sort of alienated from his skill. He's put in a situation where those things are pushed to an extreme, and then, in the simplest terms, he ends up back with his wife. He ends up gaining the confidence that he lost. So most really neat movies, you can figure out how that works. Even so, like I was watching Coming to America last night, and that's a masterpiece.
Yeah,
and you can feel the clockwork when you watch a movie like that. You think, what's another great movie? I was watching Dave the other day with Kevin Kline, where he's the impersonator and just the setups are so beautifully thoughtful at the beginning, and you just feel like you're in really comfortable hands, because you can sense the makers really know what they're doing. And the end is inherent in the beginning in a movie like that.
Joe, you were obviously a very successful broadcaster and comedian before writing Attack the Block. Was this your first go at making that transition, or were there abandoned screenplay ideas along the way?
Oh, there were definitely abandoned screenplay ideas. Loads of. I mean, I've been trying to write films since I was about 12 or 13. I've got sort of half-finished screenplays from when I was 12. And I went to film school. You know, that was what I really wanted to do. And when Adam and I were at school, as recorded in his fantastic book, Ramble book, he talks about all the films and plays that we did when we were at school. And I was working as a runner in a film production company when, then I used to make videos with Adam on the weekends, and then Adam got this opportunity to make a TV show, and invited me to help him out. So I was really trying to be in the film industry and make films when TV comedy opportunities came up.
Yeah.
So I have been trying for a long time, and I was sort of 39, 40 when I made Attack the Block.
Yeah.
So I took my time, and I would always take solace in directors like Ridley Scott, who started late.
Yeah. So when you landed on the idea for Attack the Block, did everything start to snowball from there, or was the process of kind of like firming up who these characters were going to be and what the story, what the story was you were going to tell, did they come quite quickly, or were there a lot of ideas you explored during this period that you ended up abandoning? Were there characters and different story beats, different endings?
I think it sort of stayed the same. And in fact, one of the producers always used to say to me how unusual it was for a screenplay to sort of know what it was and know what was at the center of its story and sort of stick to it. I didn't have any experience to compare it with, so I was just always flattered that he said that. It was always said over one night. The parameters were always the same, but there were little detours and different ways of doing things. Again, I've got the notes. I've got some of the notes here from Film 4. You know, one of the processes of writing a screenplay is to get notes, and it can be torture for some writers and really difficult. And there's always the pleasure of writing the first draft that's like where you're like a little child skipping around in untrammeled snow, and then you make footprints in the snow and it's all muddy, and then you have to keep going back in the snow, and it risks turning into psychological sludge, you know. But you've really got to realize that a successful movie will be seen, hopefully, you hope, by millions of people.
Yeah. And
millions of intelligent, analytical, brainy people. And movies get reviewed and criticized by more than any other art form. You won't find a novel with 350 reviews. Do you know what I mean? In every language, in every country. So if your movie's successful, it's got to be robust, and you've got to get ahead of all those different brains that'll pick at it from all sorts of different angles. And the notes process is part of that process. It's like your first audience sitting down and watching your movie and going, okay, this could have been better. I had a problem with this. This is really worth listening and taking them seriously. So here are the notes based from Film 4 on the 18th of the 9th, 2008. The first act is a slow starter. Their second paragraph is the knife. We feel quite strongly that by having Moses pull the knife on Sam, there may be too much ground for the audience to make up to get onto Moses' side quickly enough. As the fun with the first alien plays out. We love the way you've set them up as scary, only to then subvert our idea of them. But as soon as a knife is waved in front of Sam, a violent and terrifying world of association is conjured up, which we feel it will be difficult for the audience to put to one side. And you know, they were right. Yeah. But I really stuck to that.
Yeah.
because I really wanted it to be strong and challenging.
Yeah.
And I wanted it to ask a lot of the audience. But it did. They were absolutely right. It did. There's, you know, a portion of the audience that just won't get off the ride at that point.
Yeah.
Pacing repetition. So they had me dig into. They thought I should dig into Sam. They really encouraged me to dig into every single character and think of each character as the protagonist. So do 2 or 3 days on each character and think about them as the center of every scene, and think about what they're doing when they're not on screen, because that'll help you realize if you're missing any cool nuggets that you can cut away to.
Yeah.
Also, whether you're I forgot what I was going to say. It'll just help make them more robust and rounded, because when you come to make it, remember, you're giving each actor that part. So that's a whole actor and a whole person and a whole imagination and a real life. You're asking to inhabit this individual. So they're gonna see the holes in it at some point. The actor will see the holes in it. So you just have to be that actor as you write for at least 2 days, so that you can hand them the script with confidence and talk about the part with confidence.
Yeah.
So and here's another way it relates to Die Hard. One of the brilliant things about Die Hard is how it cross-cuts all the characters. Argyle in the limo in the basement, the reporter, the FBI guy, everybody has a really consistent through line, and that happened as a result of Bruce Willis not being available, because he was shooting Moonlighting simultaneously. Really? And also that movie, that screenplay went through a lot of different hands, and so a lot of each writer that came on would try and flesh out a subplot that didn't involve Bruce Willis, so that the movie was as meaty as possible, and so that they didn't need that actor. But the result is this incredibly carefully thought through movie where sort of every character has their own film. And that really inspired me as well. Okay, so what's Hi-Hat's doing at this point? What's the old lady doing? What's Sam doing at that point? I also drew a map of the estate, and as part of my research process, I visited and photographed loads of estates. So I was writing to locations that I'd been to and knew. So I was when I staged the action. So that's helped me a lot as well. I knew my arena.
Yeah, that really comes out in the action scenes, which, I mean, I imagine they must be the hardest thing to write in a script, but they're so physical even in this first draft. Was that the case? Knowing the geography gave you...
I love writing action. I find it really a relief. I said, they've stopped talking. Thank God for that. Mainly because I think good cinema isn't dialogue driven. The one thing that cinema does that that television doesn't do, is action. People stop yakking and start doing stuff. And that's really what cinema is, isn't it? When you cannot take your eyes off the screen, you can't pause it and put the kettle on or look at your phone. Like you absolutely, and that's when it counts to be in a big theater with a massive screen and amazing sound, and you're alone yet you're with 100 people or whatever. Because you literally, and that's for me what's amazing about those amazing James Cameron films, or Terminator 2 or something, or a great Spielberg movie, when an action sequence kicks off and you're like, okay, it's like transcendental, isn't it?
Yeah.
When the dinosaur breaks out of the paddock in Jurassic Park, you just know for the next 6 minutes, it's an out of body experience, and you don't sense the cutting anymore. It's just sort of there's something really profound and connective about it. And anyway, so I love action is the point, and I loved writing it, and it really helped to know to go around those estates and go, oh look, there are little bars to block the bikes here. Oh, it'd be cool to have a bike have to duck under one of those. Look at how those entry systems work. Okay, there could be a little bit of suspense when someone's trying to put the number in, and also I was trying to make a science fiction film in a place that was usually associated with sort of kitchen sink downbeat. So I was looking for anything visual that would look like a sci-fi film. So the blocks looking like a spaceship and the gangways looking like a spaceship, like an exhaust plume from a moped backlit by a green traffic light that suddenly looked like the smoke from the Wizard of Oz or something.
Yeah.
So again, like to be able to use that environment that I'd only really seen for depressing movies, to use that for action was was fun. So I loved it. I love writing the action.
And to dive in a little bit into the actual first draft. So the first noticeable change is this was originally called Attack the Estate. Was it changed to Attack the Block because that's a more translatable phrase for the US?
Estate. I think we worried that estate might, like a stately home. Like people thought it might be like Howard's End with aliens.
I would watch it.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know about like the title. I think the film has sort of gained some traction despite the title. A lot of people think it sounds like some sort of detergent advert in America. But again, that's sort of stolen from Attack the Gas Station, that Korean film. And I just like the B-movie connotations of the word attack.
Yeah. And we begin much the same way. It's bonfire night. We immediately see fireworks. The fact that the film takes place on bonfire night kind of narratively holds the whole thing together. So you got cover for this alien invasion, but you've also got an excuse to arm a bunch of children with rockets. So was it always going to be bonfire night? How did you land on that idea?
Well, I guess it's a weird time of year in Britain, isn't it? Bonfire night. I think across Europe it is, because it's sort of half this sort of fun public holiday and half terrifying, particularly in South London, because and there was even a time when there were no real laws about the sale of those things, right? Or certainly nobody really paid attention to them. You'd go down to a shop called Jack's that used to be opposite Stockwell Tube, and there'd just be a massive glass case full of ostensibly pyro weaponry that kids could just buy. And I have to admit that I played with fireworks as a kid. I went to a park and do not try this at home, but lit some rockets and held them in my hand and threw them. Did you do that?
I didn't.
I was always scared of it.
Really?
Yeah. We obviously didn't have your bravery.
Well, your foolhardiness. So I thought it was an interesting night to set it on, and basically it's dramatically convenient because you can have any stuff go on and people think it's fireworks.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. And
just good. It's good cover for all the action.
And we obviously, much as in the finished film, we see the mugging. We then see like this. What they assume to be like an asteroid or something crash into what you very specifically put in the first draft as a particular type of car, a silver Volvo or something like that. Was that like a particular reference to something, or?
I don't know where I got that from. My mum and dad used to have a Volvo, and the character Brewis is not a million miles away from me. When I was a young teenager, I would go and score hashish and marijuana in flats in estates. In fact, me and Louis Theroux would go and score. He writes about this in his book in a place called Armory Way in Wandsworth, from a particular guy. And again, this, I'm going off on a tangent, but so that was my mum and dad's car. And I would borrow my mum and dad's car, and I would go and score weed in estates. And so it always, there'd always be a residual anxiety when I did that as a teenager that I would be arrested or something would kick off, and the sort of my secret life would be exposed, and somehow the car was symbolic of my, one life.
Yeah.
And if it got smashed up, that would be a good, as the sort of shattering of the two.
Yeah, yeah.
It wasn't silver though. I don't know where I got silver from. Maybe just because it stands out at night.
Yeah.
But I think if you're going to put a vehicle in a script, I think it's good to be specific.
Yeah, yeah.
If you're going to put a plane, tell me what sort of plane it is. Because it's an easy way to make a reader feel as if you've done your research. And it's not difficult. You just image search on Google and pick the one you think is right.
Yeah, yeah.
So, and it's a nice way to make a screenplay feel thoughtful and considered.
And I'm glad you mentioned Brewis, actually, because he's in this first draft, but he maybe isn't as pronounced in the script. And there's a lot of moments that are amazing in the film, like him jumping over a shrub to avoid the police, and his explanation of what Ron's weed room is. It's a big room full of weed, and it's Ron's. That's all stuff that came in later drafts. So why did you realise you needed more Brewis?
Well, that was just part of the exercise, again, which I would recommend for everybody, of thinking properly about each character and thinking about what they're doing and how they would be responding. And, cross-cutting, meaning hopping from place to place with sort of parallel action, is a really useful way to keep your scenes short and pithy and get in and out of scenes really fast. So it was useful on that front. And also because I just wanted to keep all those balls in the air of Sam, the gang, hi-hats, Brewis, make sure they were all attended to at all times, just because it's really satisfying. And then the moments where they, I find it satisfying in other movies.
Yeah.
And then moments where they coalesce, like where Brewis and the gang meet, and then when Hi-Hats gets in the lift and the creature gets in the lift with them, when Moses gets out of the lift, figuring all that stuff out and making sure it made sense, because the audience aren't necessarily analyzing and keeping track of that as they watch it, but if you get it wrong, they'll notice. So all that background math you really have to do, not because anyone's going to break your script down, but because it'll bump subconsciously when people watch it.
The mythology of these aliens, who they are and why they're attacking, that's something you kind of, even in this first draft, like there are hints and there are sort of theories. At one point, Moses suggests that the government has sent them in there because black kids aren't killing each other fast enough. How did you decide on like how much backstory to give away and how much? It struck me as kind of a bit like in Alien. You don't know why the alien is attacking. It's just, but you don't need to know.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think there's always a risk of too much exposition, and you really only need to understand why the characters are making the choices they're making for the narrative to work, I think. And I watch a lot of movies anyway, but if you watch a lot of horror movies, some of the most satisfying ones have a sort of blankness and an emptiness at the center of their mythology. The shape in Halloween is sort of very vapid in a kind of frightening way. And I think it's sort of reflective of the world, that there's a lot of mystery around us. This virus is a case in point where science seems to be floundering to a degree that you really wouldn't expect if you'd if like 5 years ago, if you told me that our ability to we regarded ourselves as a very scientifically sophisticated culture, I think, but the virus has shown us that we're not, and suddenly it's atomized into 1,000 different opinions and approaches, and so it's not bad, I think, to under-explain something as long as the characters' decisions are motivated, and as long as they, again, there's a James Cameron thing where he says show the whole. Which would be a weird phrase to say if he was in the adult entertainment industry. But luckily he makes big budget action movies, and what he's saying is it's okay to have a plot hole, but have the characters talk about it. So if the characters admit it and confess to it and acknowledge it, then you won't feel separated from them.
Yeah.
Having said that, I did, the thing that Brewis works out is what I worked out for the aliens, the fact that they are leaving a pheromone trail. And that was something that came up while I was researching for Ant-Man that I was working on concurrently with Edgar. So I was doing a bunch of reading about ants, and ants obviously use pheromone trails, and I thought, oh, that would be useful for the other film. And so I had a whole thing worked out. But again, it's useful to work all that stuff out just for yourself and have it in your bucket.
Yeah.
So you fill a big bucket with research and thoughts and little. You really build each character before you start writing. Then you can draw on it if you need to.
Yeah.
And if you come to the end of your script and you haven't needed to draw on it, then fine, you just leave it alone.
Was there ever a point where you entertained the idea of it being like they have to save London or something like that? How did you work out to kind of make it like a more personal thing where these aliens are targeting these kids and just these kids?
Well, yeah, that was tough at the beginning, but the pheromone thing was really, really the breakthrough there. Those were the two big obstacles, how to keep it in the block. Like for a long time, I really sort of struggled with, well, why the fuck do they go in the block? Like you would just run away from the block. You would not go into the contained space. But then you realize that that's their world, and that's where they feel safe, and that's the territory they know. I just tried to use 2 or 3 different sort of pressure points: the safety of Ron's weed room, the fact that it's their terrain, and also getting high up, getting off the ground. But it was always going to be it was always going to be a low budget film. It was always going to be my little, low budget B movie. Because again, like the first Terminator movie, or Assault on those little movies by big action directors, where they're contained but they're a bit too ambitious.
Yeah.
But they pull off some. Those are really thrilling to me. Because of their economy and their invention.
I suppose it worked out for a storytelling reason. It gives you an excuse to kind of center this film entirely around the block. But was there like a bit of a happy accident thematically where something chimes about the fact that like the sort of social subtext of this film, you're dealing with like a group of people who are persecuted and at the time were targeted by police and by press. Was there a bit of a happy accident thematically about how you ended up having these aliens targeting these kids at a time when they were being targeted in real life as well?
That was all intentional. And I'm not just saying that, it was. Because the idea of otherness and alienness, that's what's at the root of racism, is the sense that somehow that person is essentially different. And it's just not the case. It's just so not the case. And it's all sort of imagined. And so the idea was, that, an alien is the ultimate other, really. So, the idea was to combine the two and, to make that the center of the metaphor, really. That's something that science fiction, when it works well, is good at doing, in the way that E.T. is a film about divorce.
Yeah.
And E.T. is a sort of surrogate father figure, or there's all sorts of subtext about motherhood and femininity in the Alien movies. Sometimes if you just choose your symbols in a sort of simple way, that stuff can work, I think. But I think the thing is that they're usually really simple, those movies. They're sort of uncomplicated. But no, that was intentional. And
the ending, again, it's much the same, but it's interesting. There's a small difference in the final film. It's Moses' moment. The film ends with the crowd sort of chanting his name, whereas it's a bit more kind of like, that you just, I can't remember exactly how in the first draft, but it sort of doesn't end quite on that note.
It's very didactic in the first draft, The first draft ends with Sam going... The first draft ends with that scene between Sam and the police, where she chooses not to... here we go. And in fact... that was the ending I had. I always knew that was how it was going to end.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to start with them mugging the nurse and ending with the nurse saying, well, no, actually they saved me.
Yeah.
So in the first draft, it ends, Sam points towards Pest and Moses, who are being unceremoniously manhandled into police vans. The policewoman says, those boys over there, are they the ones that attacked you? Sam says, no, I know them. They're friends. Policeman says, are you sure? She says, positive. She watches as the doors are slammed on Pest and Moses. The crowd pulsates with cheering, hollering kids who chase after the police vans as they pull away. So we shot that bit, but in fact, the ending of the finished film is a reshoot. We did 5 or 6 days of pickups. And you always, this is something that's been said a million times. They're usually a part of any proper film schedule. You shoot as much as you can within the budget on time. You do a first assemble, then you see what you need to really make it sing.
Yeah.
And you go and you ask for a little bit more money, or sometimes it's budgeted ahead of time, and you go back with a smaller crew and you do very specific, and sometimes it can be insert shots, because if you've got a full crew and cast together, you don't spend your time doing shots of tin cans and door handles.
Yeah.
You shoot the actors, and then the actors go away and you come back, and for a week you do shots of tin cans and door handles. Yeah. But you can also bring back 1 or 2 actors, an enclosed location, and shoot little flourishes, little curlicues, moments that you now know will really sing because you've seen the thing assembled. So John's performance was so good, and Moses's through line was working so well, that it was clear the movie needed to end on him, not Sam.
Yeah.
So I figured out and again, it's about thinking about, well, what if I was writing a film for every character at every point? And I thought, well, what's going on what's happening in that police van with Pest and Moses? And we'd already shot the crowds chanting, so it wasn't a great leap of imagination to go, oh, okay. And then the enigmatic smile is a classic movie ending,
Yeah.
The best one being the ending of the 400 blows. That's not an enigmatic smile, but that incredible freeze frame at the end of the 400 blows. But just to have, particularly because Moses doesn't. Actually, he does smile at the beginning of the movie when he's when they're walking along, going through Sam's purse. But to have that little smile from him at the end was just, it just seemed to be the right ending, a better ending.
Yeah, yeah.
And we shot that smile a million times, 1,000 different versions of his head and smiling. Yeah.
Was it as fun to write, Joe, as it is to watch? Did you enjoy the writing process?
It's not fun for me to watch.
Why?
Well, your own films never are they? Because there's just this swarm of bees in your head when you watch them, which is all the things that you could have got and should have got and could have got better. And was it fun to write? Well, writing's never fun, is it? Is it? It's never fun. Is it fun? It's fun when you're sort of in it, isn't it?
Yeah.
When you forget about the outside world and you're really absorbed in it, and you forget that you're typing and you're just imagining it and you're like transcribing what you're seeing in your head. That's incredibly fun. But it's hard work to get there, isn't it? Like the process of getting from watching the telly or eating to being at your desk or chatting to people or just something that's easier.
Yeah.
To then getting into that moment of just being completely absorbed in it. That's the tough bit.
Yeah.
But no, it was fun to write because I'd done all the research. So I had all the material and whenever I got stuck, I could go back to that lever arch file or go back to one of my character sketches. I think I was so, it was so important to me because it was my first film and I'd left it so late and I'd always wanted to do it that I really killed myself. I didn't kill myself, but I really did my homework. I really did a shitload of work before I even started writing because I was it was so important to me. And also slightly because of the subject I'd chosen, I think.
Yeah. Authenticity was important.
Yeah, authenticity was very important, and some people, I'm sure, think it's a ridiculous film. But, you know, luckily enough, it worked for enough people to I think, indicate that it was worth doing all that research.
Did you take away any lessons from writing it that have helped you with your work since?
Have I taken away any lessons?
Yeah, or did it underline what you suspected, that if you do your homework and you put the research in, it makes the writing process so much easier?
Yeah. Yeah, no, just so many really. And, you know, I was very lucky because Edgar and I had been working on Ant-Man since, for a long time, since the first Iron Man movie, really.
Wow.
Since before then, since before Marvel was Marvel, when all the rights were owned by a company called Artisan. So I'd been lucky enough to work alongside Edgar. And he's just very confident.
Mm.
And I used to get really stuck and overanalyze and sort of think myself into terrible quandaries. And he's just very, very can-do. So he was a big influence on me. So he just helped me do a bunch of learning about how to write before I even started on this.
Yeah.
So that's the lesson. Be friends with Edgar. Is that practical for people?
I'll try. I'll give it my best. And speaking of like work going forward and things you've done since, I know at the minute you're working on Snow Crash. Is that right? How's that kind of coming along? I know that's been a project you've been sort of trying to get off the ground for a long time.
Well, Snow Crash is actually being written by a writer called Michael Bacall, who wrote 21 Jump Street and Scott Pilgrim, who's very brilliant. And that's being written as a series for HBO Max. So that's something at the moment I'm executive producing and, would direct if it gets going. But yeah, that's I wrote that as a screenplay immediately after Attack the Block for Kennedy Marshall. But Paramount decided to make Ghost in the Shell instead.
Oh. We all know how that went.
But I've got a bunch of other stuff going. Something for Netflix, something for Warner Brothers, a sort of horror movie thing. I've always got a bunch of stuff happening, but it's frustrating at the moment, isn't it? Because actually, it's great for writers. It's a fantastic time to write, and I've been very productive actually over the last couple of months. Especially when it's sunny, so you can write outside. But very frustrating for the rest of the industry, for all industry, for everybody.
In moments like this, when people are returning to Attack the Block, and we're seeing in real life that the themes that you kind of grapple with in that film, they're still really relevant today. Is there ever the temptation to return to that world? Has there ever been talk of an Attack the Block 2, or is it just something you feel like you're done with? You told that story.
No, we've got ideas, and I met with John a couple of months ago to talk about it.
Wow.
So no, we've always had ideas since after the first one, but obviously, we've both been busy doing different things. But no, I think it would be, and in a way, weirdly, kind of the longer you leave it, the more interesting it is.
Yeah.
So that's all I'll say.
You've been listening to Script Apart with me, Al Horner, produced by Kamel Demek, with music by Stefan Bindley-Taylor. Get in touch. We're at Script Apart on Twitter and Instagram. You can also email us, thescriptapartpodcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.